Hello again, Steve here with a few comments on something that could help us to improve the quality of your life experience. So I heard somebody today quote something that Socrates once said, which apparently translated says, "When the debate is lost, slander becomes the tool of the loser." And I would say this is very prevalent in today. I'm not sure if it's because slander's become more prevalent or if we've lost the concept largely of debate. And debate, of course, in a practical sense, is basically the exchange of argument, right? And if it sounds like a little bit of a fight, it kind of is, because that's how we express our differences. Sometimes we try to understand. If we're open, anyways, we try to understand in some ways by putting forth our argument. And an argument, of course, is just we express something and then we try to back it up, support it, right? So how do we support something? Well, we can support something with empirical evidence. If somebody didn't know what wood was, and I was to say that wood is hard, well, I could back that up by bringing a piece of wood to that person, and they could actually feel it, and they could slightly knock it against their head or whatever, punch their knuckles into it, and find out that it's hard. So that is correct. That is that's empirical evidence for the statement, in support of the statement. Now, the other one is reasoned logic, you might say, or something like that. Like it's helping the other person to see what you're saying through your construction of dialogue. Wood is hard. And the reason wood is hard is because it's made up of cellulose. And cellulose is basically structures which are built in such a way that they want to retain their shape. It's very important to retain their shape because they have to protect what's inside it. And they have to give strength to a tree to stand up. If you look at the tree over there, you will see that it's able to stand in spite of the wind, the high wind. In order for it to do that, it must have its basic building blocks to be rigid, which is what we call cellulose. The shell of the cell is made of cellulose. And when you have a lot of compacted pieces of cellulose, or elements of cellulose, you end up with a matter that is firm, that is quite rigid. So that would be maybe not a great one, but it is at least an argument for the statement that wood is hard. So those are kind of the two, right? So now, if somebody was to counter that argument with a different argument, which might be that balsa wood. So the other person counters it with, yeah, but I have a piece of balsa wood here and it basically feels like styrofoam. Okay, that's evidence. So it's a counter argument, which is to say that not all wood is hard. And it could be reasoned then. So that would be empirical evidence for that statement not being true. And the reasoned evidence might be something along the lines, well, not all trees have to withstand high winds. And sometimes the cellulose, the energy required to make cellulose, when it's not needed, is omitted for greater cell content, for rapidness of growth or something like that, because the tree it stands within a bunch of other trees, doesn't have to be strong, or it's very short or something like that. So that would be a counter argument. Now, if one feels that they're losing the argument and they're defensive towards it, which we're going to talk about in the next coffee chat, which is defensiveness, one might resort to slander. And slander might be something like, well, you've always thought you were the smartest guy anyway, didn't you? I mean, that's a personal attack. It's got nothing to do with trees being hard, or wood being hard or not. So, and I think we have to watch out for this in ourselves, because it is not, I don't think if we ask ourselves, what do we actually gain from that? What do we actually gain? Maybe a momentary pleasure of trying to knock the other guy down, but long term, big picture, if we want to create friendship, which seems to be the foundation of freedom, slandering other people doesn't make any sense. And sometimes we reserve that word slander for really, really, really bad stuff, like you, if effing whatever, right? But subtle things, like, oh yeah, come on, man, what do you think, you're smarty, whatever. I mean, these sort of things, they're slanderous, right? Or, yeah, it's mostly like a personal attack, or an attempt to embarrass, or an attempt to belittle. And that is a sign that the debate is lost. And what do you mean by lost? Well, debate in its origin is a fight, right? It's a verbal fight. And there's nothing wrong with fighting, as long as we understand what it is, and we're trying to put across something, we're trying to reason something through, or get as close to the truth as we can in our interactions with others. It comes down to debate sometimes. So in the Latin, we see that dis means an expression expressing reversal. So if I'm expressing a reversal, is something has come at me, so I'm trying to reverse it. If somebody tells me that the sky is normally pink, there might be the attempt to reverse that to throw an argument back. The argument being empirical evidence or reasoned logic, if I have any science behind it or whatever. So that's the dis part of it. And the debate part it comes from battare, I think, in Latin, which means to fight. So it's throwing back a fight. Fight in this case is being a verbal exchange of argument. Verbal exchange of statements backed up by argument, either through, once again, empirical evidence or logical reasoning and or logical reasoning. So I think it's important for us to both make sure that we don't slip into slander in the times that we have lost our debate, just to admit it, say, hey, thanks, you know what, I realize I don't have the right empirical evidence, or I don't have the logical reasoning to back up what I'm saying, and it looks like you do. So I concede that I'm wrong in this case, or whatever. That would be a better way, and that helps with our quality of life, because that's humility, right? Humility leads to like this comfort within that says, hey, you know what? I'm not the top dog shit every moment or whatever, and I don't know. There's something comforting about that when you get used to it in a way. But the other thing is to be able to notice the irrationality that so many people run on so much of the time. And this helps us with our quality of life, because we're able to see more clearly, like with no rose-colored glasses, how people are operating and how things are operating around us. The more clear we can see our surroundings, and part of our surroundings is other people, the more we can make better decisions and better responses to what people say. And I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but in my opinion, I would say that having greater clarity is so much more important, in the same way that, if we have blindfolds on and we take them off so we can see better. Well, just realizing how people operate is sort of like seeing our community more clearly. And we get to be able to assess our relationships better, our interactions with other people, our job settings, our tasks that we're going to involve with other people. I mean, if we're going into a job with somebody who's completely irrational, a lot of the time, it's probably best that we address that early on. Otherwise, it's just going to build up inside us. We're going to have to hold this resentment all the time, so we don't want to say anything, right? But it's important to address these things right from the get-go, where there's a lot of irrationality, or there is this tendency to go to the slander. I think it's important to do that. Otherwise, we're either walking on eggshells around people or we're just resenting them. But if we come out right away, then it's off our shoulder, right? So I think that we can learn a lot from Socrates' saying, you know, when the debate is lost, slander becomes the tool of the loser because there's nothing else in the magazine, right? And that individual, be it us or somebody else, doesn't want to admit it. So, number one, if it's us, owning up to it and say, hey, I have nothing else. I'm not going to resort to slander. I'm just going to say that, hey, even though I disagree with your argument or debate or whatever, I have nothing else. I can't support what I have. Or if we hear it, we just, our blinders come off and say, well, that's what it is. I get it. Not about making them wrong necessarily, whatever. Unless we're going to have to work with them or something like that, or hang out with these people for a while and say, hang on a second, did you just realize what happened here? This is odd. Like, I feel that I've been, you know, the dueling contest or whatever is sort of out of order now. This was a presentation of arguments, and what you just said, I don't see how that's related to this. It's like I remember one time I was talking to somebody about, I forget what it was in a way. I got to that classic point, and he said, "Oh, well, you're just this. You're just angry or upset or whatever." And at the time I wasn't thinking about this, but when I think about it now, I realize, well, maybe I was. Well, what's that got to do with the topic? You know, it's like saying, you know, the sky is blue, and somebody says to me the sky is blue. I don't have an argument for it, and I just say, well, you're just so happy today. What? what's that got to do with it, right? It's got nothing to do with the sky being blue. The sky could be blue whether I'm happy or not, right? It doesn't really matter. I remember one time somebody else was mentioning there was a talk I'd listened to. I forget who it was now, and somebody mentioned that the guy had been involved with. Oh no, I know what it was. There was something about the bombing in Paris, and I had posted something on Facebook about it or something like that. I reposted a news report about how Paris had gone, or the French military had gone on a bombing raid against ISIS in retaliation for the bombing in Paris. And it was that report was on every one of the mainstream medias. There was in the New York Times, the Guardian, all of them, pretty much. But for some odd reason, I had reposted some obscure, I don't know what it was, and somebody chimed back that, hey, you better watch who you're reposting. Some organizations have agendas. And my response back was, what's that got to do with the message? Right? Is the message correct? And there was a question, and then it was kind of a rhetorical question, because I also included links or comments about a whole bunch of different media outlets that had posted the same darn thing. Does this mean that the New York Times is incorrect and the Guardian's incorrect and Globe and Mail is incorrect and all these different ones are incorrect? Yes, everybody has an agenda, but what's that got to do with the content? Is the content correct? I mean, if a mass murderer runs down the hallway yelling fire, 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 and the building is on fire, whether he's a mass murderer or not, it's got nothing to do with it. What's more important, is it true? Right? Is it true? Can it be supported? Is there empirical evidence? Is there reasoned logic to it? Those sorts of things are so important, I think. But our tendency when we lose, because we don't like to admit that we're losers sometimes. We're all losers at times. The tendency is to just go on some sort of a slanderous attack, as subtle as it might be or as overt as it might be. And for when we have our rose-colored glasses off, we see that this is just admission by action that the debate is lost. So, what do you think? Any comments? Steve here again. Great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.